Greetings, this is Jim Lindsay. This is the hands-on portion of the database lesson. Basically, hopefully you've already watched the chapter 12 lesson. If you haven't, go watch that first and then come back and then do this next. At the bottom of the chapter 12 page on Blackboard, you'll see there's a database tutorial which you're watching, and there are project files. Please get these files, the instructions, the start file and the support file. What you're looking at, this is a Word file, a Microsoft Access file, and an Excel spreadsheet. If you have, you need a Windows computer to do this, and I apologize to all the Apple people out there. Microsoft Access does not work on an Apple computer. So if you have a Windows computer with Microsoft Office on it, then the odds are good that you also have Microsoft Access, but you may not. But if you do have Microsoft Access, what it looks like is this. If you go to the Start button, go to your programs, look at Microsoft, the M's. If you see something that looks like this, it typically has a red or sort of a maroon icon. Access, in my case I'm using Access 2016. You could use any version of Access. I mean, all the way back to like Access 2000. With the simple stuff that we're going to be doing, any version of Access would be fine. What we're going to do is we're going to create a table. We're going to populate a table with data. We're going to link some tables within an Excel, within an Access database. We're going to run a query. We're going to look at forms and those sorts of things. And so this is the software I'm going to be using. If you have a Mac, you can watch this. If you can, make a trip to a public library where they almost can guarantee you they're going to have this on a computer at a public library and do this there. I think it'd be worth your time because in addition to doing the hands-on stuff through this case I have for you, I'll also be referring to some of the pages that we skipped over in a chapter because they make more sense when you see the hands-on stuff that goes with them. So that's what I'll be doing, and I hope that you will join me. Watch this for a little bit, jump over it and try this yourself on your computer, but that's where I'll be working from. Now, what am I going to be doing? Well, I've saved these files to a folder on my desktop, and I've called this hands-on database lesson. Open up the instructions for you, and as you'll see, this looks really familiar, I'm sure. This is a Microsoft Access SAM project. And so what we're going to do, you don't have to turn this in for SAM. This is just, again, for demonstration purposes with this database stuff. But I'm going to come on down here to the first steps of this project. And what you're going to see is, as you look at this, it's going to say, hey, what I need you to do is open up Access, open up the start file, and then what I want you to do is I want you to create a new table. So there's a new entity. Think back to what you learned in that chapter 12 lesson. There's a new entity that we want to keep track of, a new thing we want to keep track of in the database. And we're going to do that in something called the data sheet view. You can work in Microsoft Access in two different views, in the data sheet view, or you can do it in the design view. I really like the design view, that's my favorite, but they want us to start with the data sheet view. So let's try that. So I'm going to go over to the files I downloaded. Here's my start file. I'm just going to open it up. Access looks like this. It's going to say, hey, you have to enable content. Say OK. And right now there's basically nothing open. This is my workspace, this gray area in here. This is the ribbon up here that you're used to working with from all your Word, Excel, and PowerPoint experience. These are the things in the database that currently have been already created. There are a number of tables. There are 4 different tables. There are 2 queries. There's a form and a report that already have been created. We'll do some more of this stuff as we go through the rest of this tutorial, but they want us to create a new table in the data sheet view. So I'm going to go to the Create tab on the ribbon, and I'm going to create a table. Click on this little table button here, and this is the data sheet view. And so these different columns, you remember when I talked to you about the introduction to the whole data hierarchy, we said that the different columns are called fields, right? And so if you look at the instructions here, it's going to say, hey, your first thing you need to create is a primary key, and your primary key is going to be a field for state, because we're going to be keeping track of states with this table. And so the way that you do that in Access in this data sheet view is you just click right here, and we're going to basically make, man, that stumped me there. I don't work in the data sheet view very much. What we could do, we could right click this and we could come down here to rename the field, but what I'm going to do, I'm just going to have you switch to the design view. So up here in the upper left corner, you'll see that there's a little button that looks like a protractor and a pencil and a ruler all kind of grouped together. And if you hit this little down view, you can be in the data sheet view or the design view. Right now it's in the data sheet view. You know that because it's highlighted. But to switch to the design view, you click on design view, and we have to give it a name. This is going to be called states. Say OK, and we can then switch to this design view. So again, how I did that, I went from the data sheet view, I clicked on the little drop down box, went to design view. I had to name this table name this table states. See, it says states right there now. And I can now name this field, this primary field, I'm going to call it state. And I get to choose a data type here. And so in this data type column right here, I'd use this drop down box, and there are a number of different data types. And what I want is something called short text. And by selecting that, you'll see down here in this bottom area things like the field size and the format and the input mask and stuff like that. That basically has changed from when it was long text to from what it was a moment ago to basically this right here. And I'm actually going to make the field size of this 2. And what we're going to do with this is basically a place where we're going to keep track of like the 2-letter abbreviation for each state. Think of the U.S. Postal Service's 2-letter abbreviation for each state. Like Kentucky is KY, Tennessee is TN. And so that is going to be our unique field for the things within this table. So this is going to be our primary key. And you'll see that there is a little key icon right next to this field name up here that tells me that this is the primary key. Also, there's a little button up here that says primary key. And so that's how we start this case, is we start to create this new table, and I'm doing it in the design view instead of the data sheet view. And we can put field names and data types. Now, where do you read about this in the text? Well, in the text you read about this back on page come back to page 486. On page 486, it talks to you about things like the data definition. And on that page, specifically on page 486, it talks about these different data types like long numbers and dates and currencies and things like this. And where this is important is if you choose, for example, to make this a data type of like number, well, you can't put letters in there. If you put date, time, or currency in here, you can only put money in here. You can only put dates in here. And so it's going to enforce that rule that you create for this data type. And then as a result of that, you're going to have accurate data. It's going to have integrity. And so as you read about the data definitions in the data dictionary on pages like 487 and 488, and we're trying to get to data integrity and security and privacy on these subsequent pages of 489 and 90. That's how you do this. You basically think in advance of what you're going to be keeping track of, and then you create fields with appropriate data types and sizes. Like in this case, because we know it's going to be a state here, that's how you basically come up with a solid structure, which you can then start to populate with. And all we're doing right now is we're building structure. We haven't put any data into this table yet. We're just building the structure. The next step in the instructions basically says, hey, also what I need you to keep track of is the state name, and that's going to be like for KY that would be Kentucky, for TN that would be Tennessee, And so let me do that. So over here in Access, come to here, and we're going to have state name. Now note, as I create this name, this field name, there are no spaces in there. I just put state and name, smushed it together, and when you have the first letter of each word capitalized like that, it's called camel case. There are certain naming conventions, certain rules that you want to follow for your names, and so in this case, that's what we're going with for this. Okay, so I've got this name in there, and this one also is going to be short text. Short text basically could be anything up to 255 characters. What I would actually do if this was a production database, I would figure out which state has the longest name. So let's say it's like, I don't know, say it's like 50 characters, and I would make that 50. The reason I would do that is because whatever space you reserve in here for field size, on the disk, on the hard drive, it's going to reserve that much space, whether you fill it up or not. So in this case where we put, the state abbreviation is going to be like 2 characters. If we leave that at 255, there's going to be 253 wasted characters for every single entry in the database. And so think about like as an Amazon.com sort of thing. You think about how many transactions they have per day. It could be thousands and tens of thousands of transactions per day. And if you're wasting that much space per entry, then over a very short period of time, you're going to come up with like just a tremendous amount of waste in your disk space. And disk space is, although it's cheaper now than it used to be, it's still not cheap. And so this design, your database architects or your database designers, that's why their job is so important, to come up with a good design and idea of what this is going to keep track of. And then you can come up with accurate creations for how this thing should be put together. What we're doing right now is what the database developer would do. We're building the database right now. So if we look back at our instructions here, we've basically completed project steps 1, A through D here. Let me see if I can get that to shrink up a little bit better. Bear with me 1 second here. Being a little cantankerous here. There we go. So we've done steps 1 through A through D, and now what we can do, let's you'll see they want us to basically put some state information in here. So back in Access, just gonna hit save. Up here, I'm gonna switch views now to the datasheet view. This is where I like to use the datasheet view, basically to populate the table, because in my experience, I learned to basically to build in this view and then to populate in this view. So in this case, we want like MA for Massachusetts. We wanted VT for Vermont, I believe. You'll see, like, as I try to put more characters in there, you can hear it chirping at me there. So I'm going to go to Vermont, and I believe the others were like New Hampshire and Maine. So NE for Maine, and New Hampshire for New Hampshire. So that's how you basically create a table. And note up here, this is just like Excel. You can basically make these column widths, smaller or skinnier or wider as you need it. This is the creation of a table. We created a primary key. We used data types in here. We basically got into the let me jump back to the design view. But down here in this area, the field properties, we did things like set up field size, and you can also work with these other properties down here to do other cool things. So that's the first couple of steps in this case. Now, the next thing they want us to do is to come on down here to open up a different table called guides. I'm going to jump down here to step 4. And they want us to add a new field called years experience. And they want us to use a number data type for this one. So we're going to go to the guides table. So with this one, I'm going to save this And I can actually just close this table up if I want. If I hit this little X, this little X down here, I can close that table. I'm going to open up the guides table, and you'll see that this one is populated with about 10 different records, and these are the different fields, right? And they want us to add a new field in here, and in this case we'll do this one through the data sheet view. Instead of jumping to design view, we'll do this one in the data sheet view. But over here behind postal code, we're going to just click on this little down arrow here, and we're going to make this a new field. We'll call it years experience, and by choosing number as the data type, then we get to type the name of the field here, put years experience here. And then we'll jump down here. We can then make that a little bit wider. We can then put in the number of years of experience that different people have had, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. What I think, if again, if you're doing this in class, what I'd say, like, hey, that seems like, think about that. Is that the best way to keep track of years experience? And hopefully you'd say, no, that's not the best way to keep track of years of experience. What's wrong with this way right here? Well, hopefully what you'd say is, well, every year you're going to have to come in here and change this value to, another, to increment this up another year every time. And I'd say, exactly, that's not a good way to do it. Instead, what you'd probably want to do in the real world is you'd want to take this and make this make that a date. So basically make a field called hire date and make it let's just jump over to the design view here. So have a hire date and make it with a data type of date, and then make another one called years experience down here. And what you do is basically have the database subtract the how long it's been since they got hired to the present. Have it be doing the math for you, and so it'd be keeping track of this for you. In this would be current. So like next year it would automatically increment. 5 years it would increment by 5. But they want you to see in the case here how to add fields, use different data types, such as as we did here a second ago, using the number data type, and so on. Okay, I want to skip on down to steps 7 and 8, and then get into queries. But as I do that, if you would look on page like 488 in your 487 and 488, it's talking about the data dictionary, and essentially all these things we've been doing by working with these different field properties, either in the design view or whether we've been working through the data sheet view, we're building up what's called basically the data dictionary. And so the data definitions create the data dictionary, and that data dictionary basically is just a description of what the data is supposed to be like. And if you do that properly, you end up with the result is going to be what you see on page 488, where it's talking about data integrity. You're going to have accurate data, and that's what you want, because the whole goal of this thing, this is a ton of work. The whole goal of all of this work is basically to be able to perform queries and make reports that are accurate. And if you're allowing stuff to get into the database that's inaccurate, then you don't have integrity, or the database doesn't have integrity. And so in step 7, what it wants us to do, it wants us to basically open up the trips table and change the field size of the state from whatever it is to 2, because when we made the state table in the very first step of this thing, we gave it a field size of 2. We want to make sure that it's keeping track of 2, everywhere is keeping track of it. And so I'm trying to allude back to the text where as you read about these things and where you're doing it in real life, trying to make it make more sense. So let's do that in the case. So in Access, let's go to the trips table. We can close this table right here. I'm going to save the changes, sure. Let's go to the trips table, and let's go to its design view. And basically, we're going to make the state field, we're going to make sure that it has a field size of 2. Bring that down to 2, we'll save that, and say, hey, some data might be lost. And the reason some data might be lost is that we're going from 255 down to 2, and if there's anything longer than 2 in there, it's already been put into into records, it would truncate it down to 2. So whatever the first 2 characters were, that's what it would chop it off to be. So I'm going to say OK, yes, go back to that data sheet view, and next what I want you to do, you'll see that there are 11 records in this table. There are 11 things that have already been entered. We want you to know that when you're working with a database, you typically can reach out to a bunch of different data sources like other databases or Excel files or a number or text files or all sorts of other types of files, and basically pull that data into your database. So you can automate basically the population process, and so they want you to see how to do that. Well, how do we do that? Well, one of the things you downloaded was this file called support _sc so and so all the way to trips.xlsx. If we look at this, I'm going to open it up. You don't need to, but if you look at this, you'll see that this is a Excel spreadsheet of 11 more records, basically of the same kind of stuff that we're keeping track of in trips, and so it needs to be closed. So make sure that Excel file is closed. But in Access, I'm going to go to External Data, and I'm going to say, hey, I want you to import from Excel. And say, okay, where's the file? So I then have to browse out to where I stored it. In my case, I have it on my desktop in a file called Hands-on Database Lesson. So I'll select that one, hit open, and then it's going to say, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to import this and make a new table with it, or do you want me to append it to, or basically add it to the end of an existing table? Yes, I do. Select this middle one, and I'm going to say, I want you to put it on the trips table. And by the way, I need to close this trips table. No, I'm good. You can also link to a data source by creating a linked table, but I'm going to go with this append. Hit OK, and it's going to say, do you want to save the changes and close the table? Yes, I do. So it's going to close that table for me. Then it's going to say, okay, this is what's in that Excel sheet. Does this look okay? Yes. And I'm going to hit finish. So it's going to lastly say, do you want to save these import steps? Because let's say this is something I had to do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. Let's say I had satellite offices that regularly sent me data that I needed to import into my database. Well, I don't need to do that, so I'm going to not check that. I'm going to hit close. And if I open up that trips table now, you see that there are now 21 records where there were just 11 to start with. So it added 10 more records to my database. And now that they're in here, I can do things like I can jump in here and continue to make modifications to this data. So this is just an example for you of how to import data. Okay, great. So now let's skip on down in our project down to step 11, where it starts asking us to basically create queries. Again, this is the whole point of all of this hard work, is to start to be able to ask these questions and then create reports from them. And so they're going to have us use something called the Simple Query Wizard to create a query based on that trips table. So in Access, I'm going to go to, I'll just actually close that table up. I'm going to go to the Create tab, and I'm going to use what's called the Query Wizard. So under Create a Query, I'll use the Query Wizard. It has like a magic wand in front of a table here. You click on that, say, okay, what do you want to do? I want to use a Simple Query Wizard. Basically, it's going to just take all the different fields within that table. I'm going to hit this little, you could select individual fields if you wanted to, using the arrows to send stuff right or left. I'm just going to hit the little two arrows to send everything over here. I want it from the trips table. I want everything you've got. Hit finish, and it creates this query for me. So you see this query right down here. So this is a question. Now, it's essentially just mimicking what's in the trips table. If I were to flip back and forth between those, it's going to show me exactly the same thing. But what's cool about this query is the following. I'm going to open up the query. Got it right here. Let me switch views to the design view, or the design view of the trips query. Because again, in this trips query, I'm going to the design view. I can then start to do things like filter the results based on what I put down here as criteria. So for example, let's say I wanted to see only trips that took place in New Hampshire. Well, if I put an NH, that's one of the values that's in the database, and I run that query again, you'll see it's going to restrict it down to just things in New Hampshire. Let's say my family's really into fitness, and they want to do stuff that's like, really long hikes and stuff like that. So let's say we want to see just really long tours versus short ones. So well, in that design view again, in this design view, let's say we want a distance here. I'm going to say the distance needs to be greater than, I'm just going to put the greater than symbol, greater than like 12 miles. I'm going to hit run that. What do you have for me? Well, okay. We have several here. I've got to redo that because basically it's giving me, there's something wrong in my syntax, but it's giving me these top three are what I want just to show up. And let's say I wanted to restrict the group size to say like, for at least 15 people. So let me go back to my design view here, and let's say group size of greater than at least greater than 14. Let me run that and see what I get. So I'm doing something wrong with my my values here, but as you can see, it's starting to filter down for me, and that's where we had that file cabinet example from the very first lesson with the chapter 12 stuff. Like, how do you take thousands and thousands of records and then through mouse clicks basically get it down to an answer within seconds? Well, you do that through this query process, and I apologize that my example here is kind of lame, but that is the process that we're going through, is basically by creating this query, coming up with and then rerunning the query, instantly getting results of what we're looking for. So that's what's talked about here in we created the query in step 11, and we started to run the query and just further altering it by adding criteria. Okay, I'm back. That was bugging me why that wasn't working. I went back and looked at the trips table, and one of the steps that I skipped in the tutorial was to go back and basically make like distance a number. It was treating it as text, and when I was telling it greater than a certain number, it didn't know what to do with it because it was still looking at it as text, and so my result of skipping those steps kind of jacked that up. I apologize for that, but now with that in place, going through and restricting by state, New Hampshire, and of a distance greater than 12, that works. Now, I didn't make group size a number either, so group size is still going to probably be kind of goofy on that, but that's why that wasn't working a second ago. But if you look in the book on page 497, 498, 99, up through 500 and 504, actually 503, all these things talked about in this page, these are things that we just did. Now there's one step we haven't related a table yet. Let me just save this and do one last thing and create a table relationship so you can see that. I'm going to close this guy up. I'm going to go to the database tools up here and go to relationships. And these are there's just currently one relationship between guides and trips, and that's a one-to-many relationship. You saw that earlier. But if I want to add more tables, let me add, for example, that states table that we created. If I want to add that, then to create a relationship between tables, these are the different entities. There should be a one-to-many relationship between the trips because each trip takes place in one state, but one state can have like many different trips in it, right? You could go to Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, or you could go to Lost River Cave, Kentucky, or you could go to like Natural Bridge, Kentucky. I think Natural Bridge is actually in Tennessee, but you get my meaning. But the way that you create the relationships is you take the primary key from one table. I'm just going to left click and hold and drag it over to the other instance of it. In this case, it's going to be it's called the foreign key in the other table. So over here in the trips table, state is actually the foreign key. Over here it's called the primary key. And with this relationship, I'm going to enforce referential integrity, and I'll cascade the up and down and the deletion and hit create. And that creates that one-to-many relationship between these two different tables here. So you've seen the creation of tables, you've seen the creation of relationships, you've seen the creation of queries. And I'll close that up there. Yes, I'll save that. And so reports are basically, I'll open up this guide contact report. This is just an output of data that you've gotten from asking a question, and this is how you use the data. You ask the question to basically get good information, and once you've got that good information, you output it as a report, and you create those by creating, as you can see, reports over here. There are a number of different ways to do that. In CIS 243, you will work with Access. You'll do a number of different cases with Microsoft Access, and hopefully you'll like that. Beyond, Access is the introduction. Basically, that's kind of the way that people learn relational database ideas, and then from there you go to like Oracle, MySQL, NoSQL, and other types of database programs if you're going to work with it at a commercial level. But Microsoft Access is a really good way to basically learn the foundational ideas and learn how to do it. So thanks for your time and attention. Hopefully between this lesson and then that other lesson that we completed with Chapter 12, hopefully you learned some helpful information. Greatly appreciate your work, and thanks a lot. Have a good day.